You are not going to believe how this antique dresser turns out in the end. You seriously will not recognize it when we're done. It's got a huge bow in it. And as cool as these are, it's falling apart. Oh boy. We paid $25 for this off of Facebook Marketplace, and I'm not sure it really would have even been worth that. What are we gonna do? The first thing we need to do is obviously get it out of the garage. If you are new to my channel, we have been working one episode at a time to empty out my hoarder garage by finishing all the projects that were in here. This even had a piece that had fallen out. Thankfully, it was not missing. They still kept it with the dresser when we bought it, but that needed to be fixed. Just add it to the list of all the things on here that were going wrong. This dresser, I would guess, was from the late 1800s, although while I was excavating and finding its history, I thought it may have been a reproduction. That'll do it. Oh my god, it was hanging on by a thread. In case you were wondering what I meant by it's falling apart. It was not cared for very well towards the end of its life with its previous owner, and it definitely needed to find new purpose. And unfortunately, the way that the top was bowing, the way that it had been repaired in the past, and just how it was constructed to begin with, made it so that there was no way that I could have fixed it back to its original look. So I decided to remove those drawers off of the top. Another reason why somebody might do this is because they are not as useful today. A lot of people buy these to be nightstands. So we will be reconfiguring the top of this dresser. Wow, it used to be blue, green, and brown. Look at that. Blue, olive green, and a brown. One of my favorite things about working with old pieces like this is that you get to uncover its history as you peel back all of the layers. And boy, did this one have layers. So originally it was probably just a clear coat on top of whatever wood grain that it was. It seems like this was not mahogany. And here's where I got a little confused about the age of this piece. These nails are not antique nails. But I think what happened was that somebody repaired the top by putting these nails in sometime probably around the 70s or 80s. And that had me questioning whether this was reproduction. But later I discovered that no, it was indeed an authentic antique from the late 1800s. I couldn't get all the nails out with the hammer without damaging it, so we'll save that for later, but let's clean it up. With how dirty it was, it makes me think that this piece was not kept indoors for a very, very long time. It was probably out in some garage or storage shed or something because many bugs had made their homes in here and it was really nasty. I also took this time to use some wood glue and reattach that piece that had been broken off, but thankfully not lost. I'm so glad this was still in there because this is a custom piece fit to this specific spot in the dresser. Got it in. I don't know. I love using these drill brushes when cleaning antique pieces off because it gets into all the little crevices. Just be sure to wear a good mask or respirator when you do this because God only knows what in the world is coming off of this thing that's been there for decades. Really, you don't want to know. After I brushed it off, I continued fixing little spots that I found here and there with some loose screws, like this little piece of wood here that prevents the dresser drawer from sliding back too far. And then I also just used my screwdriver to get into all the crevices and clean a little bit deeper in different spots. This molding on the front was pretty loose and it still had all of the nails intact. I decided to just lift it a little bit and get a good amount of wood glue up under there before putting it back down with its original nails. I wipe away the excess glue to make sure that it's not going to be a mess later for me when I'm painting and sanding. And then I also glued here in this crack in the front as a way of filling it in and also making it much more sturdy. When I tell you that this piece was disgusting, I really mean it. I cleaned this thing many, many times, and much of it I didn't even film because it was just taking too much of this video. After its thorough cleaning, I decided to spray the inside of the dresser with some enamel primer spray paint. The reason I did this is because although it was clean, it still had a lot of discoloration inside, and I wanted to make sure that it looked nice and fresh for its future owner. Also, using enamel paints like this or using shellac, it will eliminate any potential smell carrying through into its future. It's a great hack. Looking at the drawers, what I can tell right away is that these are so flimsy that I think it would be best if we actually stacked another thin sheet of plywood over the bottoms, especially on this one. This one was made with such cheap parts. So we're gonna have to definitely put a new sheet over it. It also needs to be cleaned, and we need to get these handles off, which I don't even know how these are in there. What even is that? Ew. Oh, I see what they did. They put in a piece of wood in there like a dowel and then screwed these screws into the dowels. So I think we can remove them from the front. My guess is these handles were added in the 70s when they turned it this dark brown color. Again, I'm using that same brush to get into the crevices of the front of this drawer here and clean out the drawers very, very well. I don't think it's possible to clean something that is this dirty without using some power tools. Next, I'm going to take my sander and I have a 60 grit on here to take off all of the crud that was built up along the edges from all the refinishing that they've done on this piece and also bring that lock back to its original metal finish. Very cool. Yes, you can use regular sandpaper on metal as well. And later on in this video, you will see how I can use a sander to refinish marble even. So that is something that even a beginner can do, and I think you should all give it a try if you have an antique piece like this at home. I sanded everything to smooth it out and get rid of any spots that were really janky, as well as make the drawers slide better by smoothing out their sides. And I eventually went up to 220 grit with my sandpaper, so I started at 60 and worked my way up to 220. You just can't see that since everything is super sped up and edited. But keep that in mind when you're refinishing your pieces. If you start out with a really low grit, like a 60 grit, keep in mind you're going to have to use a finishing 220 grit. Maddie came out to help finish these drawers off structurally. This is something that he's much better at than I am. He's more of a perfectionist, and drawers are something that you have to get right. We didn't do anything to kind of like change the way that they were going to move inside the drawer, but we did add this piece of plywood to the bottom, as well as some side pieces that were going to hold everything together and strengthen it to where this drawer is going to last for another 100 years. It is already looking so much better now and nice and clean inside this drawer. Manny's going to use a nail gun with some small brad nails in there to make sure that everything is nailed down really well. Nothing's going to move, adjust, or change or warp over time, and it's going to be structurally sound just as well, if not better, than it was originally. The top drawer of antique dressers like these are the ones that take the most beating, and this was no exception. We had to custom make a piece of wood to go along the bottom so that it would glide perfectly. I took a 180 grit piece of sandpaper and went over all the areas that I intended to paint, and I also sanded the insides of where the drawers are going to slide to make sure everything is going to be nice and smooth there after I had primed it. The reason I'm using 180 grit is because 220 grit is too slick for paint to stick to well. 180 is a much better grit for prepping for paint, and I intended to paint this piece. And now Maddie is finally going to get out those nails that I couldn't get out earlier on in the video. Now that it has been dusted and cleaned, I'm going to flip it upside down since I always paint my pieces upside down first. I also want to show you what we're going to do to redo the top of the dresser. I've had this little tiny dining table in my garage for a really long time. I bought an entire set for $30 off of Facebook Marketplace a long time ago, repurposed the chairs for something else and a bench for something else, and have long since sold all of those. And now we just have this top of the dining table, and I'm going to repurpose the legs as well. I haven't done that yet. But I like buying just these cheap little dining tables that nobody wants. Sometimes I get them for free because I always reuse them for fixing antique dresser tops or replacing them. Or sometimes I'll find antique dressers that originally had a marble top that is missing and then use these dining table tops for the tops of them. And the one thing I must point out is that they have to be solid wood. They cannot be particle board or any kind of plywood because it won't work for the application that I'm going to show you now. So what Manny is doing is he's cutting it to size to fit the top of the dresser, and then we're going to take a router and use a router to create a beautiful edge that is decorative like the original Victorian era dresser would have had if it had a flat top. Obviously this one had the 2-drawer top with that marble in the center, but that design was a little bit flawed. As you saw, it makes the top bow significantly over time. So now this is going to be a much more structurally strong top, and it will last for at least another 100 years, if not more. Teamwork makes the dream work. I love working with him and getting all these projects done together. I think that this top looks gorgeous. It is a bit of a butcher block look, so it's very different from what you may have seen is as far as like wood grain goes for a Victorian era piece like this. But I'm going completely different than what you would have seen originally on this piece in the Victorian era. I've had this yellow paint for a long time and have been waiting for a project small enough for this to be the right amount of paint for it. And I decided with that light butcher block color on the top that I wanted to go for a Scandinavian folk art look for this dresser. There was no returning this piece back to its original perfectly restored look. You can see this piece has a story. It has bumps and bruises, and it would have taken a ridiculous amount of work to get it to look anywhere near what it would have looked like originally as a brand new piece in the late 1800s. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to pretend like all those things are not there and all these bumps and bruises are not there. I'm just going to embrace them and make it part of the story of this beautiful new artwork that we're going to be putting on this piece. I had already painted the base of it when I had it upside down outside, so that way when I got it inside, I can just put it right side up and start painting it without getting any paint on the floor. And even though I do have a couple drips of paint on the floor every once in a while, it's so easy to clean up with a wet rag. We have tile floors, and also if the paint dries, you can always just take a little razor blade and it'll come right up. So for those of you worrying about me not having a drop cloth, that's why. It saves me time and money to not put the drop cloth down and just clean up as I go. It took 2 coats of paint to get good coverage in this yellow color, which I'm surprised it didn't take more than that. Usually yellow doesn't cover very well and takes a lot of coats. But thankfully it was only 2. And now I'm going to start on that stenciling design to make this have that Scandinavian folk art look that I love so much but have never actually tried before. And this is what's going to make this piece unrecognizable if it wasn't already. I love this design. I don't know where to get it now. I believe I originally got it from Hobby Lobby, but it came in a big pack with all these different pieces. I'm going to look on Amazon and see if I can find one similar or maybe this exact same one, and I'll make sure to link everything I find in my Amazon store down below. The color that I'm using on here may seem a little unusual to you because it looks a little bit gray. It's called Chateau by Fusion Mineral Paint, and I wanted it to be like an antique white color because I didn't want it to pop out a lot. I wanted it to have a worn look to where it looks as though somebody had painted this design in white 120 years ago and it has turned this grayish off-white color with age over time. Does that make sense to you? I hope it does. If it was bright white, it wouldn't go well with all of the other character and distressed things that this dresser has. It would have looked too stark. And so it does look a little bit funny to the eye on camera, and you'll see once I get the handles on that this color will make a lot more sense. But just bear with me, and I hope that you really like how this stencil turns out because I sure did. See what I mean? It like plays with your eyes on camera. You're like, what am I seeing? But in person, it didn't look like that. But wait till the handles are on. I promise you, you're going to love this. I'm using a small little flat foam brush to do the stenciling, and I'm dabbing off my paint almost completely before using it on the stencil so that none of the paint bleeds underneath the stencil. Now that the base is done being painted, it's time to add the top on. All of the drawers are also done being painted, and it's time to get the handles on. All I need to do is set this on there. It has all the supports that it could need underneath there. They are just bowed. So what I'm going to do is eyeball it and use my fingers to make sure that it is the same all the way around, and then leaving the back nice and flush. And you can see here that big bow in the front where that marble used to be. I can't believe they thought that this thin piece of wood was going to hold up a heavy piece of marble for a long period of time. No wonder it bowed so badly. But I pushed down real hard with my weight while Manny pre-drilled some holes and then screwed all those supports into this new butcher block top that we created off of something used for a different project. And yes, I used my butt and my body weight to help do this. You gotta, use what you got. Work with what God gave you. So now he's just screwing in all the screws in the areas where he had already pre-drilled. These are the hardware that I'm going to use. I've had them in a Ziploc bag in the garage for I don't even know how long. And I thought it was just 8 handles in there because it was all in a bag. I couldn't really tell. There's 6 handles and 3 of these. It was literally fate. There's 3 keyholes, 3 drawers, and I have 6 handles. Manuel has one of the other ones right now. But wow, what a perfect fate moment that I had exactly the amount I needed in the actual style that I wanted to use anyways. Plus these were in there and I had no idea. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I cannot remember for the life of me where I got these from, but I have had them in a Ziploc bag for years, probably like 5 years, just in my stash of things in my hoard, in my garage, even in my garage when we lived in Arizona, and we now live in Houston, Texas for almost 3 years. It was a very thin metal, so I had to bend it to be nice and flat after I screwed it in, and I'm just using some screws that I had repurposed a long time ago. I have a big Ziploc bag full of tiny screws that I get off of anything. If you do DIY stuff and repurposing really often, you will know you always end up needing little tiny screws. So I always make sure to keep those. And now Manny is going to drill the new holes for these handles, and they couldn't have been more perfect for this piece and for that Scandinavian folk art we were going for. Somebody had already painted them white a long time ago, and it had started chipping and aging and distressing just on its own and then being left in a Ziploc bag for a long time. So it's going well with the distressed, aged, and antique look of this authentic antique dresser. For the sealant on the top of the wood of this dresser, I'm going to use a matte finish polyurethane that is water-based. I had a little bit of matte poly in here, or flat it says, but it's matte, same thing. So I poured some of that matte into the flat, and now I'm going to take 1 spoon of this color in Chateau. Not even filling the spoon, just dipping it in there. And then I'm going to put it into my clear coat to help sort of whitewash the clear coat to prevent any yellow and orange from coming through. The original dining table had a really yellowy orange tone to it once it had poly on it, so I'm trying to prevent that from happening. And then I take a damp sponge like this and apply it smooth and even across all the surface of this wood. And I did 3 coats with sanding in between. Something that you need to do when you're working with raw wood and a water-based polyurethane is sand in between your clear coats. What happens when you have bare wood and you introduce a water-based product to it is the grain stands back up and it gets all this scratchy texture to it. So what you need to do to get rid of that is do your first coat, let that happen, and then sand it with a 220 grit. Then you go back over it with your other coats, and you keep repeating this until it does not lift like that anymore, and you will have a perfectly smooth, beautiful finish like this. It definitely came out the color I was picturing in my head, and you can also use a light sage green paint to get an effect like this, as well as a off-white gray-white color, and it looks absolutely beautiful. Do you think we nailed the Scandinavian folk art look for this dresser? I think we did. I think it looks so cool, and it really tells a story. I also had this picture frame that was sitting in my garage, so I figured why not add a couple of decor pieces to this video that will go well with the dresser. I had a tiny bit of that yellow paint left, and I didn't want to waste any of it. So I grabbed a print that I got out of a book with some impressionist paintings in it. I just ripped out the beautiful paintings out of this book that I got from the Goodwill bins, and I use it as artwork in frames that I also get from the Goodwill bins or yard sales, and it helps me to make really inexpensive but beautiful art. Impressionist paintings are my favorite types of paintings, and I thought that this one had beautiful wheat honey tone colors in it that would go so well with the yellow of this dresser. Now that that is all done, I took it to my resale shop and got it hung up on the wall. I'll show you the dresser there in just a minute. But first, I want to show you what I ended up doing with this antique piece of marble. You saw that it had all those paint layers on there, but remember I said you can sand that off. It took about 4 pieces of sandpaper in 60 grit to get all of this off of this antique piece of marble, but the marble starts looking beautiful and new. So if you have marble that has yellowed or has some stains on it, try taking some sandpaper to it with an orbital sander. Now I cleaned it off, and I'm going to add some felt pads to the underside and create a tray out of this using some handles that I got from Hobby Lobby on sale 50% off. I believe these handles ended up being about $2 maybe at the most each. So for this, we're at $4. I'm going to use my Starbond super glue, which I will also have linked in the description box down below. This is the only type of super glue that I would trust for a job like this, since it has to be strong enough to pick up this really heavy piece of marble without breaking off. I just glued them on there to make it to where this tray can easily be lifted and moved around, and those felt pads will keep it from dinging up any furniture that somebody may set it on. And then all I had to do was take it to my shop after that. It's a beautiful way to repurpose every piece of this dresser. Didn't it turn out so cute? Also, this book stack and the shoe stretcher that you'll see in just a minute were gifted to me by somebody locally who wanted to donate things that she had created to my resale shop to help our family business. How incredibly kind is that? We are so thankful for her beautiful pieces that she donated to us. But now you get to see the dresser all staged in my resale booth. I staged it as if it were a child's bedroom dresser because I feel like this color would lend itself to being in a child's bedroom. But let's look back to what we started with originally. Wow. You really can't believe this is the same piece in this color, in this style, and with a completely different shape to it on the top. Now, don't fret, I did keep those 2 drawers, and I'm going to be repurposing them in a future video. But what do you think of the design that we went with today? Let me know in the comments section what you think, if you think we completely changed the look of this piece, and what you think of the yellow. Yellow is always a huge gamble, especially for resale. But I thought for this piece, we should do something special to really liven it up. It had been so many colors already. Why not yellow? If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to hit subscribe down below, and we will see you next time. Bye!